The purpose of this lesson is to dive into tabletop game mechanics. We're going to look at a whole bunch of different examples, going to have you identify some examples and think about how those mechanics kind of play off of each other and affect each other and create the gameplay. But first, let's review and define what game mechanics are. So as a reminder, game mechanics are the systems and rules that are designed, and together they result in the gameplay and experience. So we're talking about things like what's the win condition or the end state of the game? What can the player do or not do on a turn? What are the rules of the things and how those things interact with other things and the player and all the rules associated with that. And then keep in mind, again, as a game designer and you as a game designer, you're going to choose these mechanics, these rules, those types of things, and you're going to adjust them and massage them to create the gameplay and experience that you want. And we're going to kind of think through this a little bit as we're looking at some tabletop game mechanics. Here are some examples of tabletop games we will talk about. Uno, Connect Four, Sorry, Chess, Settlers, Catan, Ticket to Ride, Battleship, Carcassonne. Any kind of game that we talk about, whether it's a video game, tabletop game, sport, whatever, if there's a game we're talking about that you're not really familiar with, make sure to YouTube. I'm just relying on you being responsible. Go to YouTube, type in the game name, like let's say chess, and then type the word gameplay after that. So for example, if you type chess gameplay, you should be able to see some people playing the game and you can kind of see what they do on a turn and what's going on and what the core of the game is about. We're not always going to talk about all kinds of games, like let's say Sorry and Monopoly, and because it's like things will get really boring if we're always just talking about those same games. Also, we want to talk about some of these like newer games like Carcassonne, Ticket to Ride, Settlers. These are awesome games that, in my opinion, are better designed than like something like Monopoly. But anyway, one thing you want to be able to explain or describe with your game is if somebody asks you, they say, "Hey, what's the core mechanic of your game?" You should be able to summarize your game in like one sentence-ish. What is the core interesting mechanic of your game? What are the players kind of playing with, or what's the kind of interesting core mechanic? So we're going to go over some examples here, and going to have you try and identify the core mechanic of some of these games too. So for example, Connect Four, the core mechanic is you're dropping these tokens. So the dropping is important. We're using gravity. We're knowing then that they're going to stack on top of each other. So we're dropping these tokens and we're trying to create a pattern. And that's really all we got to say. Dropping tokens create a pattern. So for example, you can see you got 4 yellow in a row there. In a game like Carcassonne, so this is Carcassonne, is you're arranging tiles and trying to line up different things on the surfaces of those tiles. So you're arranging tiles for points. That's really what we really need to say about Carcassonne. We're arranging tiles for points. And if you can see on the tiles here, these are like roads, and then you got like villages or cities. You're just trying to line up, and each square is a tile. You're in the real game, you got the parts face down, you pull a tile, and then you set it down. And the next person goes, turns it, or whatever, sets it down. Checkers. So you tell me, what is the core mechanic of checkers? So if you think about checkers, you got tokens, you got a checkerboard, and you're moving those checker pieces, and the main thing you're trying to do is jump over your opponent's pieces and essentially destroy them. You're trying to defeat your opponent. So it's a game of you're using your tokens to jump over your opponent's pieces to destroy them. So something like that. Chess, what would you say is the main mechanic or the core mechanic of chess? So chess, another game that uses a checkerboard. Again, that's not the most important thing. The most important thing about chess is you have all these different pieces that have kind of different superpowers. The pawn can only move forward. The queen can move forward, back, left, right, diagonal, any kind of distance. So all these parts, kind of their superpowers combine to create this interesting game. So you'd want to say something about like the core mechanic being that you're moving parts that have different abilities around to try and defeat your opponent. A game like Settlers of Catan, that's this game right here, is you're trying to kind of claim areas. You're trying to claim territory and resources, and then expand your control. Ticket to Ride, it's a train-based game. This train-based game is you're trying to build routes and trying to connect, like let's say you want to connect cities. So you're trying to build routes, and that's how you get points. I'll go into more depth about Ticket to Ride at another time. That's good enough that's all we need to know for right now. Game like Sorry, I'm sure a lot of you have played the game Sorry, is you're trying to get all your pieces home while also negatively affecting your opponents. So you're getting those pieces around the board to your home, and then you can bounce on your opponent's piece and send them all the way back. Sports. A lot of these sports have the same exact mechanic or core mechanic to a certain extent. So basketball, soccer, lacrosse, hockey, how could we define what the core mechanic is in those sports? In all these sports listed here, the core mechanic is you're getting an object into a goal or a target. That's the core mechanic. And then it kind of depends, there's other things like, for example, hockey involves skating. That's a core mechanic of hockey. Lacrosse has a stick with a net. So we could go into more depth, but the core mechanic is just get this physical object into the goal or net. So now, this is huge. Like, this is huge in terms of you understanding things as game designers. You need to understand that the mechanics and rules, they work together to create the gameplay and experience. Games have all kinds of rules or expectations, or like, for example, sports. I mean, even like the size of the court, the size of the ball. Like, you could say those aren't necessarily rules, but those are like important aspects. And there's rules about what you can and can't do. All those things combine to create the gameplay and experience. It's super important. So let's go over some mechanics and rules in detail, and I have some questions for you. So chess. In chess, the rook can move forward, back, left, right, as far as desired on one turn, but not through pieces. In chess, the bishop can move diagonally as far as desired on one turn, but not through pieces as well. What is another mechanic of chess? What really makes chess interesting, again, is that you have all these different parts that have different abilities, different movements. And then there's just so much strategy and skill in terms of determining how you want to use those parts to affect and destroy your enemy. Let's think about the game Settlers of Catan here. So basically in Settlers of Catan, you can see this blue person here. Here's a settlement. Here's a city. They're building a road as well. And they claimed these areas. So you can put these settlements on the corner of these hexes. And you can't have, like, so here's the orange person, here's the red person. You can't have there's rules about how close your settlement can be to other settlements. And basically what happened is, so this person put a settlement on this hex. This hex is wool or sheep or whatever you want to say. So this hex, based on the design on it, we can tell that this hex is a resource of wool. This hex is a resource of wood because it's a forest. So if the dice rolled and rolled a 3, that means that this person would get 1 wool card. And then notice that this person has a city and a settlement on the forest or the wood resource. So if a 9 was rolled, that's what's showing on the dice, this person would actually get 1, 2, 3 cards of 3 resource cards of wood. And then basically what you can do is you can use those resource cards to build more settlements, build cities, and do some other things in the game. So Settlers of Catan, here's an important mechanic. The designer had to choose this stuff. They said it takes 1 clay. Here's the clay or brick, whatever you want to say. Clay. It takes 1 clay card, 1 wool card, 1 wheat card, and 1 wood card to build a settlement. So here's a little settlement here. It takes 4 cards to build that settlement. This settlement is worth 1 point. Another rule. The roll of the dice determines if you get a resource. Your settlement must be on that number. So I kind of already explained that. So for example, this one's here. This orange guy, he has essentially 4 points worth on this wheat. So if he rolled a 10, they would get 4 wheat cards. So anyway, my question to you is, how would the gameplay be different if a settlement took 3 cards to make instead of 4? So here's our rule. It takes 4 cards to lay down a new settlement. How would the gameplay be different if it only took 3 cards to lay down one of these settlements? So the gameplay would definitely be different because it would be easier because it only takes 3 cards instead of 4. It would be way easier to lay more settlements. So the game would probably speed up. The game would probably go faster. People would get more points because what happens in the game is once you reach 12 points, then the game's over. That first person reached 12 points wins. So the game would go faster. It'd probably be a little bit less stressful because it's difficult to get this variety of cards, these 4 cards. It can be kind of difficult to get that, and you got to trade, and you got to wait a certain amount of turns, and you can lose cards. There's just a lot of things that can happen. So if you only need 3 cards, it'd be easier, it'd be quicker, you get more points, it'd be less stressful. Battleship. I'm sure a lot of you have played Battleship before. You know, you got these little gray ships. You choose where your ships go, and then the other person guesses where they think your ship is, and then they put the little you put the little marker on there if they guessed correctly, and then you guess where their ships are, and you put the markers up here. So some mechanics of Battleship. Place your ships anywhere on your playfield. Your ships must not be on top of each other. That's an important rule. Think about if you could place your ships on top of each other, maybe, I don't know, maybe you could kind of scam or glitch the game per se. Another rule, you got to call out the letter and number for your turn. If it is a hit, say hit and put on a red piece. If it is a miss, say miss and put on the white piece. So there's our different colors of pieces, and of course, you're not supposed to lie. So it's important that you're honest in Battleship. What is another mechanic of Battleship? Basketball. Basketball is a very popular sport, of course, in the United States. Here are some rules about basketball. Making a basket in front of the 3-point line is only worth 2 points. If you're behind the 3-point line, it is worth 3 points. This rule was not put into place until I think it was like the 1970s. So how would the game be different if there were no 3-point option, if it was only 2-point option? So this actually happened once, I don't know if it was like the 1960s and then into the early 70s, is I think teams started to put really big, like, you know, usually your center is really tall and kind of big. I think they kind of started to have a lot like bigger players, and there's a lot more just people crammed in the middle near the hoop. There's really no point to shoot further away because it was too risky. Just put a whole bunch of big guys in the middle and they can dunk it or just make some easy shots up there. So what happened is they added that 3-point rule, and now that changed the composition of the team. Now you had maybe some smaller guys, more accurate shooting, and it kind of created a nicer mix and there's some added risk versus reward. So now you can go for that 3-point shot. It's further away, it's harder to hit, and it really changed the game in terms of developing some of those 3-point shooters versus just kind of cram people in the middle, kind of big guys. Basketball, another mechanic. If a player is fouled while shooting, they get free throw shots. Imagine if that didn't exist. If that rule didn't exist, then you could just like elbow whoever you wanted and shove them and then steal the ball from them with no consequence. It would be like pretty violent. So that's an important rule. Another rule. The basketball court is a certain size. Think about that. If the basketball court were smaller, that might impact the game a certain way versus if it were bigger. The diameter of the ball and the rim is a certain size. That's like the NBA chooses those numbers. It's regulated. They are choosing those numbers to create a certain type of experience or the gameplay that they want. If the hoop was huge, if the hoop was this big, then the scores would probably be a lot higher and it probably wouldn't be as exciting. You have a lot more further away shots and so on. So you tell me, what are some more mechanics of basketball? Baseball, if a player catches the ball after a batter hits it and before the ball touches the ground, it's considered an out. So this is kind of talking about in the outfield or infield, they just catch the ball in their glove before it hits the ground. That's an out. 3 outs causes teams to switch positions on the field. So it's kind of like 3 outs, change. Imagine if this instead were 2 outs, or what if this was 4 outs? Even down to the bat size, the bat diameter, the bat length, there's rules about that. The ball's diameter. So, I mean, think about that. If the bat was larger and if the ball was larger, that would change the gameplay dramatically. You'd probably have a lot more offense just in terms of you'd have a lot more hits, maybe more home runs. Maybe they have to make the park or the outfield larger. I don't know. What are some other mechanics of baseball? Some of the rest of this we'll just kind of go over, give you some examples here. I want you to think about, so in tabletop games, what you can do on a turn. To think through that's incredibly important. In a video game, it happens so fast, it doesn't really feel like it's a turn. The program is going through what's happening so fast. But in a tabletop game, you're waiting for your turn based on what the other people are doing. Then you get your turn and you can do very specific things. So here's just some examples. This, of course, is not everything. Here's just some examples. So in a tabletop game, you can move a certain amount of pieces, a certain amount of spaces. You can maybe get items, collect items, pull a card, get a card. Maybe you can choose some items. Definitely use items, use cards, lay a card, whatever. Attack other players. Let's think about like chess. You can trade. So that's kind of a cool mechanic in terms of like in Settlers of Catan. That's a very, very important mechanic because you can trade cards with other players and lead to discussion. Certain games like Apples to Apples, you might kind of discuss what your ideas, your thoughts. There's other like social deduction games like Werewolf and Secret Hitler where that's a very important part. Coup. Laying a tile, orienting a tile, moving objects, not just your character, but moving other objects. So those are some examples of what players can do on a turn. How far can you move, or what? Like how far can you go on a turn? Not all games have boards where you can move like a certain amount of distance. Like so, you got Clue, Monopoly, Sorry. So a lot of games that you can move a character a certain amount of distance. My challenge for you is to not think beyond that. But here are some examples of how we can control how far you move, or kind of add some randomness. You can use dice. You can use a spinner. You can pull cards, numbers that have pull cards like that have numbers and colors, like Uno and Sorry. And then, for example, there's games where just the characters themselves have rules about how far they can go. Maybe you have a heavy and a light kind of character. The heavy maybe can't go as far. Maybe they can only move 3 spots, and then the light can move 5. I don't know. But again, there's a game called Flashpoint that is a firefighter game, and there's characters that can move a certain amount of distance. It is super important for you to be able to very clearly define what is the end condition of your game. How does your game end? Lots of games end by using a timer, or maybe you get a certain amount of number of turns. So, example, sports definitely use timers. Soccer, hockey, football, you have a certain amount of time. Maybe the game you get to an end spot on a board. For example, Life, Candyland, Chutes and Ladders, you just get to the end spot on the board. My challenge again for you is let's think beyond this. Most of the games that are like this, I don't know, I can't think of too many that have really good depth of gameplay. I know there's some out there, but in terms of this, like Life, Candyland, Chutes and Ladders, like we need to design stuff that's beyond that. A game can end once you have destroyed your opponent. So a game like Battleship, some of these card battle games like Magic the Gathering and Yu-Gi-Oh! Maybe the game ends once you collect all of something. Maybe the game ends once you're the first person to a number of points. Example in Settlers Catan, first person 12 points wins. Maybe you have to trap other pieces. So in chess, you have to trap the king. Maybe the game ends once you use all the pieces up. So Carcassonne, once you've used all the tiles, the game ends. Maybe the game ends once you use all your cards up. So for example, Uno ends once you've used all your cards. Maybe you have to create like a pattern or a certain orientation. So Connect 4 is an example of that. Maybe you just have to survive a certain amount of rounds. Not only do we have to clearly define the end condition, but we need to clearly define who's the winner, or the win condition. What is the win condition? So in sports, it's basically always who has the most points in a certain amount of time. In a game like Sorry and Life, it might be getting all your pieces or one of your pieces to a spot on the board. Like who's the first person to get those pieces to that area on the board. Might be most points or money. For example, like Monopoly, who has the most money. Carcassonne, who has the most points. Same with Scrabble. Maybe it's whoever's the first to destroy the opponent. So in Battleship, you are the winner if you destroy your opponent before they destroy you. Same thing in chess, of course. Maybe it's whoever collected the most of something. So there's a game where you're slamming this lever down and you're trying to collect marbles. It's called Hungry Hungry Hippos. If you've never heard of it, it's kind of a silly game, but check that out. That was our dive of a little bit of a closer look of mechanics in tabletop games. Again, remember that mechanics are systems and rules. Together result in gameplay and experience. We really want to focus on the win conditions, the end states, what the player can and can't do on a turn, and the rules of things and how those things interact with each other. That is all about mechanics, and you'll be designing that throughout class.